Okay.
Okay.
I'm John Guthrie Ford, and I'm with my colleague Mark Crichton, representing the Port Aransas Preservation Historical Association, and today we have the pleasure of interviewing Professor William Bill Behrens. Professor Behrens had a long tenure with the University of Texas Marine Science Institute, and we'll be speaking to that topic today. Welcome, Bill, and thank you for agreeing to be part of the interview project.
You're more than welcome. You asked me to start out telling a little bit of my background. I did a bachelor's degree at Cornell University, as Mark did. And a master's degree at University of Michigan. I spent a year out in University of California, Berkeley, and decided to finish up at Rice University, which I did in 1963. And I started working for the lab down here in 1961. So as you see, I started a little bit before I had my dissertation finished, which caused a little bit of a difficulty, but I managed to overcome that.
A little bit slower, people will be transferring.
So that's my academic background. As I said, I came to the Marine Science Institute 1st of September 1961. Hurricane Carla came along, and about 10 days later, so there was a little bit of delay in getting started down here. I stayed with the Institute, 1977. A little bit before that, the Institute was combined with a geophysical laboratory in Galveston. And since I was the only geologist in Port Aransas, they thought it best that I transfer up there to be with more geological people, researchers. And so I did in 1st of January 1977, and then that geophysics lab was transferred to the main campus in Austin in 1983. And I moved up with them and stayed there until my retirement in 1999. I was with the Marine Science Institute throughout the first two phases, and then remained also with the Marine Science Department through since its formation, which was during that time, and until I retired.
When you came here in 1961, what did you find?
I found 4 old buildings. My office was a desk in the hallway, and there had just been a fairly large study done by Scripps Institute of Oceanography personnel, and so one of the things I needed to do was to sort of go over that and try to build on that. It was still the Institute, or the science there, was still in somewhat of an exploratory stage, finding out what existed along the coast and what the problems were. I was interested in sedimentation and sediment transport, and especially through my dissertation was interested in carbonate sediments. And there are carbonate sediments in Baffin Bay, the hypersaline environment to our south. So I did quite a bit of my early work in that area. The facilities changed quickly. As I said, I came in the 1st of September. By November, we moved into the first modern laboratory building, and I had my own office and laboratory then. And they also acquired a ship from or a small boat actually, from the Parks and Wildlife Department called the Stargazer. And it was a tunnel stern, 36-footer, and it had on it the serial number 1 of the sub-bottom profiler that was a new tool that could be used to bounce echoes not only off the bottom but into the bottom and look at some of the substructure in fairly shallow water. I got a couple of publications out of that delineating the buried valleys under some of the bays. When sea level was lower than at present during the glacial period, the rivers extended out across the continental shelf and incised valleys where a lot of the bays are now. And I was able to define some of the outlines of those bays.
It sounds like the scholars at MSI were among the first, if not the first, scholars to take a systematic and scientific approach to understanding the Texas coastline. Is that the case, to your knowledge?
Yes, I guess you'd say that. The outline I gave you of the directors that have been there, the E.J. Lund and Henry Hildebrand and Gordon Gunter, were much into that phase of early description and definition of what goes on along the coast.
Did that include, as well as geological, did that include aspects of life, marine life?
Oh yeah, that's, I guess I should have reviewed some of those early publications before I came over here to remember what all went on then. But yes, they defined a lot of the ecosystems and the various organisms that were within them. I don't know where to go from there.
During these early days, what was the relationship between the Institute and the town?
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a lecture series? Did you have an open house? What type of integration was going on?
In the early days, very little. When I came there were, I think, 7 people that were on the payroll as support personnel and 5 or 6 scientists. And that, even although the town was very small then, about 500 people as I recall, that was a small portion of the town. I guess we're a small portion yet, although there are over 100 people employed out there now. I looked at a recent over time there was a couple of I think considerable contributions to town. B.J. Copeland, one of our staff members, was a town council member, and Pat Parker was one of the very early Boy Scout leaders, and also became head of the school board and was involved in a lot of the early expansion of the school.
I believe that John Thompson mentioned something about the Institute at one point sponsoring something for the Boy Scouts. I believe it was Oceanography Day. Or did the Institute over the years attempt to integrate or attempt to invite the students from the school district here, from the high school, over to the Institute for any, here's what college is about, here's what this institute is about?
Not much as I recall. John did the Oceanography Day, and he was, as I'm sure you found out from your interview with him, a very active scout leader. And he created this Oceanography Day, which I participated in a couple of times, and they were very large and successful events. There is at present time an active program of integration with schools, but at that early time, no, there were, I do recall one time the director that I came, who was here when I came, had a town day, evening, and each of the 3 or 4 of us that were staff members then stood up and gave a little lecture on what sort of research we did. I don't recall that happened more than once, but it might have. And I know that all of us were rather somewhat ill at ease in doing so, but we were politely received, and it was a small effort to let the town know who we were and what we were doing.
When you were here in 1961, tell us a little bit about your colleagues. a little bit about the number of colleagues you had, and we understand your area is in geology. Tell us a little bit about their areas.
Well, there weren't very many, as I said. In fact, I think the director was the only one who was here, who had been here more than 6 months. It was a turnover. Chase Van Balen was the microbiology researcher there, and John Briggs was an ichthyologist, and I was the marine geologist, and Odom was the ecologist. There was, well, Pat Parker was on leave to National Science Foundation in Washington. He had a position there, or there was a position open, but he had just left it to go up there and would return within a couple of years, but his position was vacant at that time. And I'm pretty sure those were the only researchers here at that time.
When you say researchers, it sounds like your academic day, your academic week was dedicated to primary research. I haven't heard anything about the teaching curriculum, about the student body. Would you tell us a little bit about, was there a student body in 1961, and about the evolution of that aspect of the university?
There was certainly an evolution there. When I came here, we had a summer course program for graduate students, and we would get students not only from UT in Austin, but from many other schools all around the country. And each of us taught a course in our own field. That would add up to 4 courses. And I think there were, I don't recall what the duration of the courses were, but those courses had a marine science label on them, but they also counted toward a credit in the respective departments in Austin. The course in marine chemistry counted as chemistry, the course in marine geology counted as geology, and so on. And the marine science endeavor, or teaching program, had this rather unusual situation in that there were marine science courses on the books before there was a department or a degree program. But it was for the summer teaching, and it was for graduate students. While I was there, shortly, a few years after I was there, I realized that a lot of the graduate students taking those courses from other fields, like a chemistry student taking a marine geology course, wouldn't have any more background in geology than an undergraduate would. So I advocated opening the courses to undergraduates, and that was done thereafter. So we had 30 or 40 summer students. We had graduate students also. Each person had I guess on average 2 graduate students, 1 to 3 or 4. And again, these students would get their degrees in the respective Austin departments. You would get a degree in chemistry with the parenthesis marine science underneath it. So that, again, it was very much a part of the departmental programs in Austin. That slowly changed over time.
Could I intervene with a question?
Yeah, sure.
Imagine that I was at the Austin campus and I wanted a degree in chemistry, but I did want an emphasis in marine science, that aspect of chemistry. How many summers during my 4-year enrollment, how many of those summers would I be here? What would be required? Would it be 3 summers or all summers? Or?
Well, 4 years, you say 4 years, I assume you mean an undergraduate degree.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there were no undergraduate degrees, and there still are no undergraduate degrees in marine science.
So that parentheses would not be on the baccalaureate degree.
That's right.
That would be on a PhD degree?
Master's or PhD, yes.
So let me just change level to a graduate student.
Mm-hmm.
Would he or she be here 3 or 4 summers? How many of the summers would?
Well, the program became usually a student would come to the university and spend their first year in Austin. and then come down here and take a summer course or two. And at that point would decide on who was going to be their supervisor. And if they chose one of the staff members down here to be the supervisor, then they would come back and take another summer course. They would probably spend 2 summers, and after the first year in Austin, come down and do their residency down here. After they would do their dissertation or thesis down here, under the supervision of the appropriate faculty member down here. Initially, we had just lectureships, and it wasn't until Curly Oshla became director that he insisted that we get on the academic track of assistant, associate, and professor tenure track.
Yeah, I do want to revisit that aspect in a few moments, but just to round off here, the budding curriculum nature of the institution, starting to be involved in teaching. The first stage involved a summer program for graduate students interested in a marine science aspect of their discipline.
Right.
And that also included work on the master's thesis and doctoral dissertation at the residency here, in residency
Right.
here.
Mm-hmm.
But all their coursework, most of their formal coursework was still in Austin, Texas.
Well, the first year and maybe another year. So once it was decided that they had enough courses, had filled in maybe some gaps in their undergraduate program, or took the courses that were appropriate for the area of research that they wanted to do in their dissertation, then they would come down here and spend full time as a graduate student.
Okay. What year would you say that transition started appearing?
Well, there were graduate students here when I came here. One, I think, as I recall. But he was Dr. Odom's student. The directors always had tenure track appointments, by the way. They did have professorial appointments. It was just the rest of the staff that changed later on to that track. But that program was underway when I came here.
Okay. Then let me carry it to the next transition point. When did graduate students enroll here at this physical institution from day one? And they were in residency here all the way through first year student, through the granting of or completion of the doctoral dissertation, for example.
Well, there were very few, if any, students who came here directly. Again, they always went to the main campus in Austin for the first year, and sometimes for a few additional courses. So at present time, we do recruit students so that they are identified as being interested in and planning to go into marine science right from the start. But it was usually students that discovered us and became interested and came down here after they started on the main campus.
So right now we do have a dedicated program where a student graduates with a baccalaureate degree and can start his or her graduate work right here on the UMSI campus.
I'm not sure about that. I think they still need to spend a little bit of time in Austin, at least one semester of coursework in Austin.
That's educating me. I didn't know that. I thought we had a dedicated. Thanks. That cleared that up for me. I wasn't quite clear on that.
Well, I've been retired for 9 years, so it might be a little bit different.
Yeah.
Exactly what I remember.
Oh, probably not.
Yeah.
The graduate students worked with their supervisor, and that's how I presume the faculty had the warm bodies to help in research projects.
Right.
And tell us a little bit about your first graduate assistant.
Well, my first one happens to be in town here, Dr. Richard Watson.
Well, that would be an interesting story.
And he fit the picture that I just drew. He came to Austin, enrolled in the geology department, came down here for a summer course and said, this is what I want to do down here. And so he went back to Austin, took a couple more courses, and then moved down here and started working first on his master's thesis, which involved the shell accumulations in the central part of Padre Island. And he defined why they were there and quantified the degree to which the shell accumulated there. We did some offshore work. There's a drift bottle at the museum. That was part of one of our projects of observing offshore currents. Drop a drift bottle in a known place and see where it washed up on the beach. A little, rather crude, but still it gave us definite information about the offshore currents. And he completed his master's degree. He decided to look into beach sediment transport for a PhD dissertation. And he was very clever in devising things like using a cement mixer to dye sands, fluorescent dyes on them, and then place them on the beach and quantify their movement along the beach, and at the same time recording the wave action that was doing the moving. And he completed that, I can't remember the year he completed that, but that was his dissertation topic. At the same time that he was here, and I think he came down with Richard, was Steve Frischman, who had just entered UT Geology Department, and he worked on a master's degree in Baffin Bay on carbonate sediments that I had been studying down there. And he was here through Hurricane Celia, and became much more involved in things that were going around town. He had started a PhD program, but he pulled out of it and decided to start a newspaper instead. And that's how we got the South Jetty.
His name again was?
Steve Frischman.
Steve Frischman. Wow, that's informative. That's an interesting piece of town history on top of university history. You mentioned that when you came here, you and your other three colleagues, you had, I believe, a lectureship. You were lecturers.
Right.
When did the MSI adopt the more traditional and formal academic rank program?
As I mentioned, that was when Curly Woshalog became director.
That would be, I have that year here, I guess. By the way, that would be 1965 through 1970.
Okay. It was part of the deal that he made. He would come and be director if certain conditions were met, and one of them was that all of the staff members would get academic professorial appointments. And we started up the track then.
So you four gentlemen are scholars in 1965, maybe 4, maybe 5 at that point. You think you'd added a time or two, or another warm body?
I think Pat Parker had returned by then.
Okay.
And Van Bell and Briggs were still there.
So at that level, everyone started formally at the assistant professor level.
Yes.
And followed a typical tenure track, 6-7 years to the associate, and then on to the full.
Right.
And
Dr. Briggs left and went to the University of Florida, University of South Florida, before he got tenure.
Okay. And what bodies sat in terms of granting tenure? What bodies sat in terms of approving yearly promotional, yearly raises, promotion? In other words, was it self-contained within the institute here, or did Alston have? Was there a faculty and a deanship in Alston that was looking at these?
Well, traditionally, the full professors form the budget committee of a department, and we had only the director as a full professor. So, furthermore, our degree programs and courses were all still co-listed with campus departments. So we had to come up through the campus budget councils of the respective departments.
So when you came up for tenure, your work was reviewed in Alston?
Yes.
By the Department of Geology, the Faculty of Geology. Department of Geology, I understand. Anything else on the academic programs. Have I missed anything?
I guess my question is how as the academic programs changed, the physical plant changed. Did they go hand in hand? Did one drive the other? Because at some point you said there were 4 derelict buildings when you came here. After that, we have this, at some point, this monumental campus there with precast concrete and everything. When did that
Well, that
started?
at the end of Curly Woshlog's tenure. I think it was 1972, roughly, 72 or 73. We had sort of gained enough momentum, been recognized enough that the university, I think at one time, considered moving the institute to Corpus Christi, but they were convinced that the facility out here was really far better, or much better located. And so whether to expand or not was actually a question when I was nearing attaining tenure. But they decided, I think Norman Hackerman was the Vice President for Academic Affairs, who at the time, that position actually ran the university. The president was more or less a formality. And he decided to, he came down one day, said, have a faculty meeting, called a faculty meeting. Well, I'm going to tell you something. He said, I put $3 million in the budget for you to build a new building. So now go ahead, design it, do it. And so a building committee was appointed, John Thompson, Chase Van Balen, and myself. And we supervised the design and construction of the new modern laboratory building, the physical plant, and a dormitory, and the student married housing. All those buildings went up during that period. There's a timeline out there actually in the visitor center. I was going to go visit and check up on it, but I forgot to. But that includes that event. And it was just about the same time that we got the Longhorn. And well, the Longhorn resulted from Hurricane Celia in 1970. We had only gift ships before that, ships that were usually somebody's fishing boat that they no longer wanted, and they gave it to the university, and we converted it into a research boat. The largest was the Lorraine, which was about a 40-footer. So one of them was the Marcia K, which had been given to us by Otto Kahler, who was the president of Pearl Brewery. And he was a very avid fisherman, and I guess, he died and left it to us. The avid fisherman part comes in because a lot of fishing tournaments would start with everybody at the same time, and the fastest boat would get to the best fishing grounds first. And he always wanted to be that boat. And if he wasn't, he told his boatman, turn around, go back, and put bigger motors in it. So this 51-foot plywood Chris Craft had 2 840 Caterpillar diesels, supercharged diesels in it, that you couldn't actually walk straight up into the salon. You had to bend halfway over because they had to raise the floor so much for these 2 huge engines. Pat Parker was the acting director at the time, and he saw the opportunity to repair the Marcia K by building a steel hull around these 2 big Caterpillar engines. So that's how we got the 85-foot Longhorn, by repairing the Marcia K, by building the steel hull around the Caterpillars. Those 2 items were the major, blow my own horn. Again, a boat committee was appointed, John Thompson and Pat Parker and me, supervised the design and construction of the Longhorn. And that was pretty much the expansion up until very recently. That was the only other building that was built was the visitor center with the auditorium and library and aquaria in it, up until the present time when we're doing a major expansion now.
Well, we thank you. You designed a beautiful campus. I'm sure a very functional one too.
Yeah, it was kind of hard to see the Longhorn leave, but recently, but it had a lot of memories.
Would you say the Longhorn is a sentimental favorite
Oh yes,
at the MSI?
oh yeah.
I've understood that she was extended at one point during her life. Would you tell us about that?
Bob Jones was the director for a while, and it was during his tenure that we actually got departmental status. But he also, I think as a part of his deal for coming, said, give me enough money to extend the Longhorn. So they did, and the university did, and he cut it in half and added 20 feet to the middle of it, made it a little over 100 feet long, and renovated it.
When you say departmental status, does that mean you are now a formal department within the UT Austin system?
Yes.
So if I'm looking at a brochure or a bulletin, study bulletin in Austin, will I find you listed, MSI listed, as a department?
Yes, the department, right, Department of Marine Science.
Okay. Oh.
There was just a little offside, there was I think it was, well, I have to look it up there, when Carl Oppenheimer was director, we did get the name of the department changed. He didn't. He had visions of a much broader effort, and including a department of, well, now I think of it. Well, he changed the name of the department to the Department of Marine Studies, so it could include things like government interactions with marine science, economics, marine economics and things. That lasted a couple of years and got changed back to the Marine Science Institute. So we didn't overstep our goals. But Bob Jones was the one who, it was kind of set up already to become a department, but somebody had to push it, and he got all the paperwork together and pushed it, and got a Department of Marine Science established.
Back to the Longhorn for a moment. I remember one of my early images of the institution, other than driving through the campus there on the way to the beach or to look at the dune guns, is seeing an institute vessel on the water with a group of students aboard. My guess was that they looked like undergraduate students from Austin. Was there a program where they came down for a day or an afternoon, or?
There were a lot of programs. We had our summer teaching still, and still do, and the Longhorn was used for cruises and in connection with the courses that were taught there. One of my colleagues, Linton Land, in the Department of Geological Sciences, started a couple of courses. He didn't come down here, and he came down here to do research, but he didn't come down here to be a resident scientist, but he had very definite interest in oceanography, and he formed and started teaching a course in general oceanography. And he, at the same time, he started another course called the Exploration and Exploitation of the Sea. And these were both undergraduate courses, and the Introduction to Oceanography was one of these large courses, had hundreds of students, and I know in the academic year 74-75, I co-taught that with them, and there was a program of bringing students down for, I don't know, 4 or 5 weekends, a different batch each weekend, because there's so many students. They take about 30 of them or so, and we take them out on the Longhorn. So what you saw might have been one of those courses or one of the other. There's also been a teaching program that Dr. Rick Tinnen started, and that has been to provide facilities for visiting classes anywhere from elementary to graduate school. And he has led many field trips on various vessels, probably a number of them on the Longhorn, that would not necessarily be part of UT Austin program, but could be part of any other school program in Texas or even beyond.
Great, thank you. Well, we scheduled a 45-minute period, and we're closing in on that right now, but we might ask you to close the interview with an anecdote or two about the institution, something a little less formal than the good information you've given us. Thank you so much.
Can I get something in here?
Absolutely.
I have different interests, sometimes, Dr. Ford, in the expansion, the 20-foot midlife expansion of the Longhorn. Was that done, I'm assuming it was done to make the vessel a better scientific platform to do the work either more efficiently or to allow work that hadn't been done before. Is that true, or was it just to patch it up?
No, it wasn't to patch it up. It was true. I couldn't cite anything very specific, but as a result of the expansion, there were 2 labs in the Longhorn, whereas previously there had been a lab and a galley. So that added to that part of it. There was more deck space also. That was largely the result of that effort. Originally it was designed, and I think throughout its life, it was not dedicated to any one field of study. So it was designed to have open labs that you could bring a lot of equipment aboard and then take it off again after your cruise. And that facilitated that type of operation too.
Another question has to do with Bob Jones. Someone outside the academic community mentioned the other day that they thought that Bob Jones' vision set the stage for where we are now. An awful lot of the faculty that's now here that are really superior. They're at the top level of their fields in oceanography and were brought here during his tenure. So he must have had some sort of vision about what it could be out there. And I guess the question is, how do you recruit people who certainly have a lot of options? They go to Scripps or any other place that they want to go.
Well, I think he was able to do that because he stepped in at a point in time when, previous to which, the Institute was not so much an academic decline, but an organizational decline. They took a while to find him, and he was actually the silver thread, calling back a student who had gotten his degree. He got a master's degree at UT. He was a student when I first came here, actually, and he got his PhD at Hawaii. But he came back when they pulled the silver thread. And previous to that time, the director had actually been treated rather poorly. It was at that time also that I mentioned that the Marine Science Institute had been combined with the Geophysics Laboratory in Galveston. The Geophysics Laboratory moved to Austin, and then they were separated again, and it became the Institute for Geophysics and the Marine Science Institute as separate entities again. That involved the moving a director around a little bit and finally firing him. Well, he resigned, but apparently it was a little difficult to get a director for a couple of years thereafter until Bob Jones came along, and he made a good deal. He said, well, I don't know what he said, but I can envision him saying, well, nobody wants this job, but I'll take it if you do it for a few things for me. And he got the university to do that, and that's why he was able to then expand the faculty and hire good people, who ultimately got on the tenure track and became tenured professors.
I think that will wrap it up for me. We certainly appreciate you coming in today. Is there anything that you've not had a chance to say?
Probably lots and lots of things, but I don't know what they are.
If you think of them in the future, the machine's always here. Give you a chance to wrap up your day-to-day, give it a thought. Is there?
Turn it off and I'll tell you one.
Yeah, and turn it off on